so much. When I was taking out the list in the vestibule, there were 92 names, and so I kind of was so shocked, surprised, but very, very happy that you wanted to come and hear about the rich history of our parish. So we have a wonderful evening, and our speaker, Father Bob Hayman, taught history for many years. He can fill you in on the specific details at Providence College, has written a multi-volume history of our diocese, and is the archivist, so he knows so much of the history that all of us maybe have heard a little bit about along the way. So very happy as part of our 150th anniversary to welcome Father Bob Hayman. But I also want to welcome Father Jack is back and Father Mahar. Always happy to welcome them back and to welcome all of you, and a special welcome to Father Hayman. Thanks, Father Hayman.
I hope you realize and appreciate that Father Mahar is an excellent historian. He wrote the best, or one of the best, parish histories that have been written on Pleasant Parish. So he has this great interest and great knowledge. And Father Unsworth, Father Mahar, and myself are all assistants and helpers at Our Lady of Mercy Parish, which is the mother parish of St. Bernard's. So in case you didn't know that. What I'd like to do tonight is simply look at your heritage. Basically, I would like to talk for about 45 minutes. If I go beyond your limit, I invite you to knock on the tables like we did in Louvain, whenever the professor went over. And look basically at the Catholic heritage here in this parish and in this town. The town was created, North Kingstown, was created by separating from Kingstown in 1723, having first been settled in 1674. So it's a long history, secular history, which unfortunately has not been well documented. The key to North Kingstown was Wickford Harbor. It was the outlet for the Providence plantations. Providence plantations were those farms, Casey Farm on the road to the south of us, was one of the remainders of that long history. And the produce of those farms, the cattle, the horses, were shipped to the West Indies and through Wickford Harbor. So this was an agricultural community, right? That's what has made claim to fame until the 1830s. In the 1830s, people came up with the idea that we should build our textile mills on the shores of a lake or an ocean, where we take advantage of a humid climate. Why a humid climate in a textile mill? The machines were going to spin the thread, but you tie the thread to a weaving machine, right? And if the thread breaks in the midst of your weaving a piece of cloth, then that cloth is wasted. It's argued that you would need to locate your mills in a humid climate so the thread is less likely to break. All right? So, we begin to have mills built in this town. Entrepreneurs began building mills here in the North Kingston as early in the 1820s. If you were taking a ride down to Shady Lake, all right, that's one of the earliest mills in this area. And there was a whole host of mills. By 1906, that is 2 years after St. Bernard's was established as a parish, The town had 4 cotton mills and 8 woolen mills, and gave employment to nearly 500 people, in addition to the other kinds of employment. All right? You've got all these mills, but you don't have enough people to staff the mills. You ran out of the population. So you began to hire immigrants. And when you begin to hire immigrants, the ones you begin to hire are for the mostly part Irish. Between 25 and 30,000 Irish men and women, mostly young, mostly in their teens or early 20s, fled famine Ireland and came to Rhode Island. And a good number of them would find their way south to work in the mills in both East Greenwich and here in North Kingstown. The average pay for a worker in the 1820s and 30s was $1 a day for a 6-day week. All right? We're still in a very Puritan atmosphere here, so you didn't work on Sundays. But you had a 6-day week. 14 hours a day, sun up, sundown. A total of 84 hours across the week. Woman will earn, of course, less than $1 a day, maybe 50 cents per day. A barman boy, and you began working in a mill with a boy at the age of 7, a barman boy would have made 42 cents a week. Right? That's what people were paid back in the days when we had the early days of textile mills. You were paid at the end of the month. All right? Being paid at the end of the week, that's a later development when the unions keep becoming involved. A boarding house, and that's what we're looking at here. I know many of you can't see it. You can still notice it as you're going up 10 Rock Road. Right? You're on the right side, across from the Lafayette Mills. A bed, not a room, a bed in a boarding house, plus board meals. That's $1.50 a week. You had to also be able to put something aside because you would want to bring over your cousins, your brothers and sisters. Maybe your parents from Ireland. You need to put something aside for the times when you were out on employment. And it happened all the time, right? In summertime, the water dried up. In the wintertime, it froze. Mills shut down, all right? You were out of work. And in all of that, you were able, if you were industrious, maybe to put aside a little bit money each week. Some to bring their relatives over, others perhaps to buy a plot of land when land was cheap, to build a home. And the home started in small places, you still could see them around, and people added to them as they had the money. And if they wanted to have a church, say St. Bernard's, that what little they had extra would be given to the church. Having a church and having a priest was important to them. People not only gave of what was extra, many people gave of what they needed. So important was having a church and a priest. Unlike Europe, where the government owned the churches and the government paid the clergy, in Ireland, you had to support, if you were a Catholic, you had to support your own priest and your own government, because the Anglican Church was the one supported by the government, the Catholic Church wasn't. So people came here, and they worked hard. They They worked long. They saved their money. They had many people to help and support. But they also were generous. They were generous to their church. In the 19th century, Catholics in general contributed 2% of their income to the church. In the 20th century, when Catholics in general were much wealthier, they contribute 1%. So we have a heritage of generosity that we need to sustain. In 1852, the second Bishop of Hartford, who had the good sense to live in Providence, sent the first priest to live in East Greenwich, the village of East Greenwich. And his duty was to care for the 35 Irishmen, or women, or children that lived in that town, that village. All right? He would come south, if you will, and visit the various middle villages where there were small Catholic populations until 1857. And we all know what happened in 1857. Depression. Mills shut down, people lost their work, he couldn't support a church or a priest, so they closed. And they shifted over to Phoenix, over in the town of West Warwick, where there were over 1,000 Catholics. So they were doing well. It's not until 1869 that the parish in East Greenwich is reestablished. All right? With a priest, let's see if I can get, no, I might not be able to get this one. But anyway, no, sorry about that, forget it. I might be good at history, but not audio issues. The priest in East Greenwich in 1869 not only said Mass in East Greenwich, the village, he also traveled the 6 miles by horse and carriage down to Wickford and said Mass in Shady Lee, which is the first place they had Mass, right? And then in Wickford Village itself. Not only did he say Mass on occasion in Wickford, every third Sunday, he would take the Stonington and Providence and Stonington Railroad and go the 16 miles to Kingston Station and there be picked up by an Irish tailor by the name of John O'Reilly and taken into Wakefield, where he again said Mass in a fall or other a combination at that particular time. It's not until 1874 that Catholics were numerous enough in this area for the first Bishop of Providence, Thomas Henrican, whose diocese was created in 1872. All right? By 1872, there's so many immigrants that the bishops of the United States petitioned the Holy See to divide the Diocese of Hartford, which was Connecticut and Rhode Island, and create a new diocese, the Diocese of Providence, which was the state of Rhode Island plus Bristol County, Massachusetts, and the 2 islands. All right? So in 1874, first Bishop of Providence appointed a pastor, William Halligan, to the Church of Our Lady of Mercy. And Halligan would take up that duty of his predecessor and travel horse and buggy 6 miles to Wickford and the 12 miles to Wakefield, 16 miles to Wakefield. Finally, there's enough of people here for Halligan to buy a half acre of land on what was known as Phillips Hill. You know where that was? That's where St. Bernard's Church still is. Phillips Hill. All right? And what was then called the Post Road. That's how you brought mail up all down the East Coast. Post Road. So on the Post Road, he buys a plot of land to build a church. All right, and he paid $250. All right. The Irishmen of the church, they dug out the foundation. I still don't know whether it was simply a trench for the foundation or a cellar, because it makes a big difference. Do you know what it means to dig out a foundation? Right? You don't have a mechanical instrument to do it. You have a shovel, and you have a crowbar, and you have a dump truck. That's how you did it. All right? If you gave up, if you did it during the day, that means you would have to give up a day's work. All right? That was your contribution to the parish, which you would have earned that day. But most of the people could not afford to do that. So they came after work to dig the foundation. And how long did I say a day's work was? 14 hours. All right, maybe in the 1870s, they'd gotten a little better. People were arguing for a 10-hour day. And maybe it was still 12 hours at that type of time. So a man, after having worked 12 hours, would come to the site, and of course he would have had walked from where he worked to where the site of the church was to be, all right, do the digging. And it wasn't just the men. The men hadn't eaten except at breakfast and lunch. Someone had to provide supper for them. Right? And that was their life's work. And digging, if you have noticed, is thirsty work. And this is 1874. We don't have parish societies, and we don't have the Father Matthew Temperance Society. So people drank their beer out of pails. All right? Not only did the women supply the food for the men who had been working all day, they also held the lanterns so they could see what they were doing. As much of the work was done after sunset. All right, a parishioner by the name of Early, a stonemason, and another by the name of Quirk, who was a carpenter, headed the crew that actually laid the foundation and built the wooden church. Now, it was only trenches, that's one thing, but if you had to dig out the entire foundation, cellar hole, that's altogether different thing. Just look around. How many stone walls are there around here? So, like Providence, it's all sand, right? But here, it's sand and rock. So it wasn't an easy thing. Why would people do that kind of thing? After work, they're tired, hungry, and it was laborious, because the church mattered to them. Having a priest living among them mattered. And so they were willing to give of themselves to have them. The church would be dedicated on a Sunday, July 4th, 1875, under the patronage of St. Bernard. Well, you might remember Bernard being a 12th century monk, French monk. But why was the church named for St. Bernard? Father Maher can tell you why Blessed Sacrament was named Blessed Sacrament. But we don't know the real reason for most of the naming of churches. I suggest this is the reason. The first priest sent to East Greenwich to establish a parish there was sent by Bernard O'Reilly. Bernard O'Reilly was the second bishop of Hartford. Bert O'Reilly was an impatient man. And in 1855, January of 1855, he took a steamer, the Pacific, from Ireland to return to the United States because he had no tolerance for his priest taking time off. Pacific never reached New York. The bishop was lost. So I think the church was named St. Bernard's to memorialize Bishop O'Reilly. When I said the priest would say a mass in East Greenwich and then go down to Wickford or then go down to Wakefield to say a second mass, did that strike you as strange? Because traditionally, a priest only said one mass a day. That's all he was limited to saying. One mass a day. But it's in the 1870s, in this new diocese of Providence, the Bishop Henrican gave permission, which he could do, according to canon law, for a priest to say 2 masses a day. Right? So Father Halligan, going down to Wickford or going down to Wakefield, after having said Mass in East Greenwich, would have been fasting. You remember fast before Holy Communion? Well, they were fasting from midnight. Right? And how long would it take them to drive down, say Mass? They wouldn't probably be able to eat until lunchtime. Right? That's another reason why his health was broken. Not only because of the environment, but also because of the rigor of what he was doing. If you were to Google North Kingstown on your computers, you would find that between 1870 and 1880, the population of North Kingstown increased from 3,563 to 3,949, or a growth of basically 10%. By 1890, it had dropped to 6%. So the church was founded in 1874. Do you recall what happened in 1873? My students in history didn't remember either. 1873 to 1992 or 3 is the period of the long depression. The long depression. Mills shut down. People lost their pay. They had to depend upon the charity of others, particularly of the storekeepers. You're paid only once a month. All right? So you survive on credit until the time your paycheck comes in. But if there's no paycheck, then how do you pay the merchants? Depends upon their charity and their sense of responsibility. All right? Tough time to start a parish during the midst of one of the long depressions in the first industrial depression in the history of the United States. That's when this parish started. Also during this particular period, particularly towards the end of the period, you had a migration from French Canada, from the province of Quebec. The people of the province of Quebec, they couldn't compete with the abundant fields of the Midwest. So they turned to dairy farming and to orchards, fruit raising, all the rest. Just like we did here in New England. Farms were too small because the Canadian families were large. So you could only split them up so many times. So the Canadians came down looking for work. And the mills were great to have them, right? Because they intended to have large families. So the father went to work, the mother stayed at home, took care of the home, and all the kids went to work. The only way an Irish family or a French-Canadian family could survive if more than one member of the family worked. It's the combined income of the family that enables a family to raise enough money to survive. There was no industry in the United States during the period of the 1870s to the 200s to the 1990s, wherein a worker earned enough money to support a family. All right? Again, there are people who are not well paid, but who prove to be extremely generous. Right? How do you collect money? First and foremost ones, you imitated the Protestants and you rented the pews. You paid pew money. And once a year you had an annual collection, which the priest went around to collect. Okay? Imagine collecting the annual collection in St. Bernard's Parish. How scattered it was? Right? What a job it was for the priest to move around and collect that annual, take a census and collect the monies along the way. There was no such things as temporary payments. When you took out a loan, all right, or you wanted to buy something, you make an agreement, and at the end of the period that you agreed upon, then you paid the money. All right? There's no installments. So at the end of the year, you paid your pew rent. At the end of the year, you paid the annual collection and all the rest, or didn't. There's a very interesting document that comes from St. Mary's Parish in Newport. The pastor there had a grand collection in the 1880s where he intended to pay off the parish debt so they could consecrate the church. So he took a collection of his parish. Right? He wrote down the person's name, how much they gave, and why they didn't give. Very interesting document, because he was very frank. All right, so for a priest to sustain himself and to support the church was challenging. The 1870s, the 1870s to the 1900s, very important period in the history of the state. All right? Is it well documented? No. What happened in that period is that the Irish would come here as impoverished, many uneducated, many desperate, rose from the lower class to the middle class. Right? You might have rented a house in Providence. Providence is full of 3-deckers, 2-deckers initially, 3-deckers now. All right? If you own the house, you generally rent it to your relatives the next 2 floors. Providence, like any city, was hot in the summer. It was noisy. You don't get electrification of machinery until the 1920s. So you had belt-driven machinery. And if you take a trip to the Slater Museum in Pawtucket, and you get an idea of how noisy a city is. It smelled. Right? All the processes used in manufacturing smelled. It was unsanitary. The highest paid Irishman in 19th century Providence was the night soil collector. Providence mandated that at a certain period of time you had to clean out your sewer. Your own personal sewer. the Irish, some of the Irish who wanted it, and they were very well paid. All right? Noisy, hot, smelly, all the rest. So what do you want to do? You want to get out of the city. And where do you want to go? You want to go to the seashore or the bay shore. And that's what happened here. Some of you live in Soldierstown, one of the primary resort areas here in the bay. You can have a summer cottage by simply building a platform and raising a tent over it. All right? A lot of those around. You could build a shack. All right? And most of the tents are on the rented land, or better than others, the cheaper way of doing it. You can build a shack. That's what my relatives did down on the shore, the Squamicut. All right? And they got really fancy and built a real house. But they were cheap. Land was cheap, lumber was cheap, something you could do. All right. The growth of Saunderstown, which is the southern part of this parish, as a summer residence, was aided by the building of the Seaview Railroad. Do you know it? Yeah? Okay. Where did it run from?
Providence.
Ran from Narragansett. That's where it started. Ran up the shore to
Providence.
East Greenwich. At East Greenwich, you got off and you took the Union Railroad, all right, into Providence. That's how you got from Providence to Saunderstown and other places, all right? It wasn't cheap, light rail, the trolley car line, all right? That's how you did it. The Seaview ended its service in the 1920s, thereabouts. Why? Not the Depression, we're not there yet. Automobiles. The state of Rhode Island began to build roads. Have you ever been on the Tower Hill Road? Especially on the right-hand side going south? Notice how it bumps? That's the original roads, concrete. And you left spaces between one slab and another so it could expand. That's why you go and pump, pump, pump up on the way down. Right? 1920s, when you begin to build roads, people have cars, and the railroad's not necessary any longer. In the 1890s, the French Canadians who were here, and they were scattered all over the place. They worked in the mills, they worked in the quarry. They began writing the Apostolic Delegate in Washington, complaining that the Irish pastor was ignoring their needs. And it was. And said all he had to do, right? In fact, he wasn't fluent in French, did speak it, but not well. He could hear their confessions. I don't know if you ever tried to go to confession in a foreign language. I've been embarrassed many times. Anyway, he complained. And Bishop Hawkins would reply and say, hey, I don't have the priest. I don't have the priest to send. We get all kinds of problems with that. Finally, in 1903, Bishop Hawkins began to consider sending off Wickford as a separate parish. In November of 1903, the pastor of Our Lady of Mercy sent him a result of the census he had taken that September of 1703. Fitzpatrick reported that in the Wickford's mission, there are 365 souls, men, women, children. The number of baptisms for the year 1903 was 11. The number of marriages was 3. Sunday offering collection averaged $4. The Christmas collection for 1902 was $191.98. Total church revenue for the year 1902 was $1,538.88. Pew rent was $808.10. Seat money, $87.40. That's your revenue basis for establishing your parish in 1904. All right? could you survive? The generosity of your parishioners. In June of 1904, the bishop met with Father John H. McKenna, known to his clergy friends as Red McKenna, because of his red hair. The bishop noted after he gave Father McKenna the news that he was to be pastor of St. Bernard's, the fact that Father McKenna did not seem to be overjoyed. All right, this is 1904. Okay? At this time, it doesn't seem that the bishop established clear boundaries. Where is the northern boundary of the parish? Where's the southern boundary of the parish? We got all these roads and all that, now we could mark them out. But in 1904, they didn't. So we have a parish somewhere around here. All right. This wasn't a particularly good time to establish a parish. In January 1905, the Wickford Worcester Mill, which employed between 60 and 70 hands, stopped work. Nevertheless, Father McKenna would go ahead with plans to build a rectory. On January 29, 1906, he bought the land to the left of the church for the use of building a rectory. And you would have to, since the carriage sheds, that's carriage sheds were just with people where they put their horses when they came to church. They put them in the sheds there. Well, they had to move them to the back of the church. All right? So that's what the rectory. Right? The men dug out the foundation again of the rectory. And it wasn't easy. They didn't just have to move stones, they had to move boulders, and they had to landscape the whole area. It's up on a hill. Okay, so that's what you're doing. The stone foundation of the rectory was donated by an Irishman, Peter Burns. The plans were drawn up by Irish architects Murphy and Hindle. In order to pay for the rectory, Father McKenna took out a loan from a local bank for $3,500. And 3 years later, he took out another loan for the same amount. Right? He had permission to build a rectory for $4,000. They cost him $5,000. All right, so he kind of went over it. When the church was first built, it was lit by kerosene lights, right? It was not until 1913 that you had electric lights. And all the time you got an electric railroad running from East Greenwich to Narragansett. So electricity was there. You just didn't get it hooked up. In addition to his endeavors of building a rectory, look at the rectory. It's a beautiful building. He really didn't spare any expense. In addition, Father McKenna persuaded the owners of the Elm Grove Cemetery to set aside a portion of the cemetery for the use of Catholics. So if you're interested in finding the names of the early Catholics, St. Bernard's, try the Elm Grove Cemetery. Many people have gone to them, recorded with the inscriptions on the tombstones, and they are available. In September 1904, Father McKenna went up to Providence and spoke with the bishop about finding a building in Saunderstown where he could use the same Mass. He wasn't successful. It was not until 1908 that a similar building became available. You know it as the South Ferry Baptist Church. You can't miss it. It's out there all by itself. All right, South Ferry Church was built in 1805. But in 1900s, the congregation split. And the dissenting congregation built a smaller church in Charleston. The new minister in 1908, that was hired by the citizen congregation, he put up the church for sale for $400. All right, $400. Now, Father Mack is looking for a church to buy to move to Saunderstown. Or at least according to the deed of sale or deed of grant, initially, the church was given to the Baptist Society on condition that it would cease to be for Baptist use. The land was to revert to the family. So we had to move the church. Thomas, town of North Kingston, refused permission. Now, it'd be much easier to move a church in 1908 than it is now. Why? Because you don't have the telephone poles, the light poles. You could have done that. But the town did not give permission. All right? In the meantime, the old congregation, the previous congregation, the one that did split, they got the money together and they said, we'll buy the church back. And so for $425, $25 is what Father Mack paid for the architect to redesign the church for Catholic worship. He got his money back. All right? But you almost had a Catholic church in Saunderstown. In any case, St. Bernard's lost interest in Saunderstown because of the founding of St. Thomas More or St. Philomena's in Narragansett, right? They took the people in Saunderstown as parishioners, and Father Mack was free to do what he wanted to do here. All right. Father Mack's successor was Father Joseph Gibbons. The church is getting trouble. When the continual problem is going to be, there's no room. So he adds two wings added to the back of the church, one to serve as the sacristy and the other to serve as the baptistry. You might remember that. The baptistry is also served in the summertime as the additional seed for the summer residents. All right? So the church is filled at that time. Incidentally, Father Gibbons, who's pastor in 1915, he was the first pastor to own an automobile. We're getting up there, folks. Horse and buggy, gone, automobile in. Father Gibbons was replaced in 1921 by Father James Tierney. When Bishop William Hickey, spoke with Father Tierney, he wasn't particularly interested in one part of his parish, which was known at that time as the state school for the feeble-minded. Right? One of the things that Bishop Hawkins had done, and the bishop before him and after him, they believed in religious freedom. Now, we don't have religious freedom in the United States until 1818, when the last state-supported church was disestablished. However, if you were a guest of the state, in the state prison, or in the state farm, or at the state reform school, or at the school for the feeble-minded, you did not have religious freedom. You had a chaplain who provided religious services, and everybody had to go. It took the bishops 30 to 40 years to convince the superintendents and the wardens to allow Catholic priests in to say Mass. Then it took another 4 or 5 years for the Commission on Charities and Corrections to agree to pay the chaplains, same way they paid the Catholic chaplains, the same way they paid the Protestant chaplains. All right? So, Bishop, in 1922, September 1922, he appointed Father Fitzpatrick to be chaplain at the home for the feeble-minded, if you will. Okay? Now, how do you get there? You go up 10 Rock Road, you go down, all right, and then Route 3, oh, that's kind of wild. So Father Tiernan, your pastor there, agreed, I'll give you $1,000, and we'll buy Father Fitzpatrick a Model T. All right, so your first assistant pastor was also chaplain at the school for the feeble-minded. It gets a better name as it goes on in years. All right. When Father Tiernan was transferred in 1928, he was replaced by Father John Cooney. Between 1910 and 1920, the population of North Kingston decreased by 16%. Again, why? Again, we need a decent history of the state to know and answer questions like this. Much of Rhode Island industry went south after the First World War. All right? And went south, the workers lost their jobs. Okay? Then between 1920 and 1930, it increased by 26%. Again, why? Okay, we have heard of the Great Depression. People who rented homes up in Providence and other places, many of them lost their jobs, lost the rent. And they had summer places at the beach that didn't cost them as much. And so they came down and used that. All right. In the 1940s, we have a major change in the parish. And that was the building of Quonset Point in Davisville. All right? That had been the National Guard training base. And along with a summer colony. Well, the government took all the base and most of the summer colony. And they moved many of the cottages, which were leased, moved them off onto land apart from the base. Right? And we have thousands of men and women coming to live in North Kingston in this particular time. By the 1950s, the population of St. Bernard's and of North Kingston increased by 2,000%. Right? So many officers and enlisted men, many lived on base, many off base. They came to live here. And the priests of the 1950s on had a problem that Father Unsworth knows well. Where do you put them? And I suggest to you that the history of the parish after 1950 it will be radically different than the history of the parish before 1950. We're basically dealing with the church as evolving into the church of today, with all the challenges and questions that we are experiencing. So, I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed something. All right, I'm done. If I can, I'll answer any questions if you have them. Yes?
The history does the church that was when I first moved here in the late 70s, early 80s, they used to call it the Mission Church, which is Kateri, which is its own parish now.
Yes.
When did that Was that an offshoot from the lad school?
That
or-
is getting beyond what I was planning for tonight. I appreciate the question.
For the next 50 years.
Before that happened, we split off the western part of this parish, and St. Francis de Sales was created because we simply couldn't fit all the people in the existing church, so we had to have another parish. And then the area around the lad school began to increase, I think about 1980 or so, and they split that off and created a mission. The chaplain at the school for, well, the chaplain for all children with mental difficulties lived in a farmhouse in that area, and he began a mission, and now it's a parish.
Father, as you did your research, what kind of archival resources did you have? Imagine going into some basement with file cabinets and piles of...
I have files of newspapers, articles that I've culled from newspapers. All right? And I would do better if the state of Rhode Island was a little better in concern with historical research. You have at least two papers here, one in East Greenwich, one in Narragansett. They're on microfilm, but they're not been digitized. We can get them digitized, all right? I can sit at my computer and put in a name, find it all there right there. But that hasn't happened yet. I do recommend to you, excuse me, my legs are getting tired. I do recommend to you the parish history from times past, 25 years ago. It has a lot of information, and I didn't want to repeat it all, but there's a lot of information in here. And you're welcome to look at my archives anytime you want.
I think the person who wrote that is with us tonight.
What's that?
Norma?
The gentleman who wrote it, is he here?
Yeah. Norma LaSalle is there.
It is very well done.
I think she was here. She and her husband worked on
John Wood. Right, it's a very well done parish history. Yes.
Are you a native Rhode Islander?
Am I native?
Of Rhode Island?
Yes. You can't tell from my accent? I grew up in Pawtucket.
Okay, so
I can pronounce it.
you'll have what parish was?
St. Edward's. Yes.
You did a great job.
My pastor was, one former pastor, was famous for reaching out the window and firing his six gun at someone who was breaking into the church.
Father Hayman, can you say just very briefly about any anti-Catholic attitudes that the people in this area would have experienced? You know, whether it was the know-nothings or anti-Catholic sentiment.
All right. In the 1860s, the parish priest up in Our Lady of Mercy, he was coming back from Providence on a train, got off, and someone accosted him. Was going to beat him up until one of the more respectable citizens in East Greenwich stopped him. When the priest from East Greenwich traveled by a horse and buggy down to Wickford or later to Wakefield, a parishioner would always accompany them. Not to keep them company, but as a bodyguard. This is you're talking about the know-nothing period. When the priest went down to Wakefield, as I say, he got off the train at the Kingston station. Then he had the buggy ride into Wakefield. And there was one day, the man who picked him up, a tailor by the name of John O'Reilly, found that the road was blocked by felled trees. They didn't want the priest to get there. This was one of the most bigoted people in the state in the 1860s. Was an Updike. The name is common in the history here. And he got up in the state legislature and said he didn't want any Irishmen serving in the Union Army because he wanted to be indebted to the Irish. He was noted for his bluntness, and he was often disciplined for speech. So yes, this South County, it was noted for its strong Puritan heritage, if you will. Catholics, like the Irish, they would stay among themselves, just like the French Canadians, just like the Italians would do later. All right? They wouldn't associate with their neighbor. They might work in the same factory, but often in different departments, because the overseers certainly didn't want to have trouble. So you had the Irish in one department and the natives in another, or whatever you wanted. That's how it was. And that was the way it was until the 1930s, right, in South County. It wasn't pleasant. That's why we need Catholics to practice their faith in an upright, proper manner, setting a good example. That's the way we deal with prejudice and hatred.
One or two more questions, anyone? We'll wrap it up. One or two, anyone? Thank you, Father Hayman, for being here tonight. Thanks to Father Hayman for being here with us and kind of really informing us about the area, the history, how our parish grew. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight, and watch for more of our events for our 150th anniversary. They'll be coming up, and we certainly welcome you to all of those events throughout this year. It's a great heritage, a great history, a lot of generosity that I heard Father speak about, which continues today. So thank you so much for your generosity in supporting St. Bernard's of today. Have a good night.